2009, I took an intensive workshop with Paul Stanitz, who was the originator of Fungi Perfecti, where I got this shirt. That was a great experience and gave us a taste for what fungi can do in a lab environment. I'm more interested in how to cultivate this type of different types of mushrooms in a more of a home-based farm-scale environment, in a more low-tech way, because that's where most of us are operating at. Most of us don't have labs in our farmscapes, but most of us have access to logs and weedy grasses and straw and leaves and branches, all of which we can grow fungi on. Does anyone recognize this log? Or you can't say what it is. From a distance, it grows in the national park as a weedy tree. It's a nitrogen fixer. Competes quite closely with the ohia. Oh? No, it's not actually in the legume family. This is Phaya, Morella Phaya, the fire tree that's rapidly overcompeting ohia. So we can get food from wood that's also culling a problem. We can grow most oyster mushrooms on different weedy species in Hawaii. Albizia is one of the only exceptions to that. In terms of the different types of fungi, so I have about 10 minutes, right? And then we'll go into Q&A for another 10. Okay. In terms of the different types of fungi, there's the saprophytes, which are the organisms that consume lignin and cellulose in our environment. Lignin is the hardening agent in wood, and cellulose helps with transport of nutrients and creates strong, healthy cell walls in plants. So if it weren't for fungi, as we know, we'd be surrounded by a lot of woody debris. Thank goodness for fungi. So saprophytes are the lignin and cellulose decomposing fungi. There's the mycorrhizal fungi that live in the soil that help with nutrient exchange. There's the parasites which attack living trees. The largest organism in the world is a mushroom in eastern Oregon that's attacking a full 2,200 acre forest. The organism is 2,200 acres in size. So the saprophytes, mycorrhizal fungi, parasitic fungi, and we also have the endophytic fungi, which are the fungi that live inside plants. It's recently been discovered that roughly half of the cells in plants aren't plant cells at all. They're fungal cells. Yeah. But I'm mainly interested in how to turn wood into food and medicine. Oysters are what is growing on these two bags of straw, and they're the easiest to grow. Of the 13 workshops I've taught in mushroom cultivation over the past 2.5 years, I always have students go home with a bag of oyster mushrooms because they're just so easy. All you need to do is water the bag once a day, and mushrooms pop out after 2, maybe 3 weeks. Logs are a bit more finicky. Oysters, like I said, will grow on most of the weedy logs here in Hawaii, except Albizia. This log has been inoculated with shiitake. My good friend Eddie Richter, who lives up in Honoka'a, he grows shiitake for the high-end restaurants on both sides of the island. And I buy my sawdust from him. So these kits are entirely local. We grow out the sawdust spawn for oyster. And I go into greater detail on what sawdust spawn is in my different workshops. You can also grow mushrooms on pretty much any cellulose-based material. That includes grass, wood chips, paper. What else is cellulose-based?
The gas?
The gas works really well. Hair even works. Hair is really good because it has lots of protein in it. Lots of nitrogen. Just saying. Anything else? How about macnut hulls? That'll work. We said cardboard already. How about hats? I inoculated this hat with oyster mushrooms about 8 months ago, so you're now all being sporulated with oyster mushrooms. Wherever I walk around, I try to wear this hat. What else do I want to say? Oh, I have my little cheat sheet. Protein from mushrooms can be as high as 40%. Mushrooms can be as high as 40% protein, depending on the mushroom species. Another really easy to grow mushroom that grows here in Hawaii, but we can't import it, and it's highly medicinal, is the reishi mushroom. Heard of that mushroom? It's famous in Chinese medicine. And we can't import it here because it attacks ohia and a couple of other native trees, but it's already here. So we can legally cultivate it in a lab environment or a home-based outside lab environment. It's arguably more aggressive than oyster mushrooms. And it's shown to reverse cancer and has all sorts of immune boosting properties. Oysters are mainly thought of as an edible mushroom, but they also have highly medicinal qualities as well. They lower cholesterol, they're antiviral, anti-cancer, and that's true of most mushrooms. We were wandering around today in the forest up by Ocala, and we found the pepeon mushroom. Who's seen that one? Looks like an ear. The scientific name is auricularia, which means ear in Latin. There's also another easy one to grow is the turkey tail. It's the most common mushroom globally. The only place it isn't found worldwide is Antarctica. It's pretty much found every other place that has woody debris. And it's great to tincture up. Don't have any of my tinctures here.
What about lion's mane?
Lion's mane, I haven't grown that one out here. I've grown it out in a lab environment, but it's fairly aggressive too. Yeah, I think that's about all I wanted to say. And I wanted to open it up for questions, Q&A. My next workshop is probably going to be in Volcano, but I'm in May at the Volcano Arts Center. But I might try to host one up in Hamakua. I get to teach a workshop up there. I might have it at Akiko's B&B in Wailea. Okay, so let's open it up for Q&A. Yeah.
When you're growing mushrooms, how do you know you're not getting a bad spore that flies in that's poisonous?
Ooh, good question. How do we figure out that we're not growing an undesirable mushroom? Once you start working with mushrooms, you can get a clear sense of what they are based on the smell. They have a really, each individual mushroom has a distinct smell. And you can also test for the specific type of mushroom using morphological features, how the mushroom forms, and also it's a good idea to take a spore print, where you take the mushroom, cut it in half, put one half on a white piece of paper, and the other half on a black piece of paper. And sometimes the spores are different colors, so that's why you have a white and a black sheet. That's another way to ID the mushroom. But I'm well acquainted with the mushrooms I grow, so I know this is oyster. There's actually, this is pearl oyster, and there's about 7 different tropical specific oyster cultivars that work really well here. Phoenix oyster is a delicious one that has a bit of a pinkish hue. And I do sell these mushroom kits. I have a bunch in my cart and also logs. Any other questions? Other questions? Yeah.
Have you ever grown shiitake mushrooms?
That's what will be popping out of this log in about a year. Because straw has a much higher surface area than logs, it's much easier for the mycelium to colonize it, as opposed to, this doesn't have very much surface area at all. So it takes a while for the mushrooms to pop out, to colonize pretty hard lignin and cellulose. So shiitake can grow, it mainly grows on oaks. Shii means oak in Japanese, I'm pretty sure. Shiitake means oak mushroom. And shiitake prefers really hardwood, which faya is. Koa is not. It can also pop out of koa really well.
How do you see it being an agricultural crop, money-making crop? Here?
Great question. That's a great question. I've been researching forest farming. I'm gearing up to teach an agroforestry class through UH Hilo. And one topic that folks have been researching on the mainland is growing different types of mushrooms on logs in a forested environment at 80% shade and watering it once a day and marketing the mushrooms that pop out after a year to different high-end restaurants. We could also do this with edible mushrooms and highly medicinal mushrooms. I think there's an open market for growing reishi on this island. Growing reishi, powdering it up, putting it in capsule form, and selling it at the supermarkets and island naturals and farmers markets.
Yeah, I was watching a documentary on Netflix, and there's like mushroom hunters, and then they go up in the forest, and then they're like, oh, chickens here and roosters there, and then they're gathering up the mushrooms off of barks and.
So that's wild harvesting.
Wild harvesting.
And that has a place. It's more difficult to do here in Hawaii just because most of our mushrooms fruit at higher elevations. We have a lot more diversity of mushrooms here in the islands than even on the continent. But most of the mushrooms are very, very small. And most of them aren't choice edibles because they're so small. And we haven't really looked into the medicinal properties of them yet. So in terms of farming, I think I'm starting to sell these bags at the farmer's market. I sold 20 a couple weeks ago. I sold out. That was kind of neat to experience. So I think there's an open market for selling these at the farmer's market in value-added form and in other creative avenues. Drink.
I had a few questions. What causes a mushroom to fruit?
Right, okay, that's a good question. It's in a natural environment, it's a combination of the right amount of light. Contrary to popular belief, mushrooms do need a certain amount of light. It's usually dappled light, the type of light you'd see in a forested environment. Combination of light causes them to fruit, with a certain amount of water, about 60% water, the consistency of a wrung out sponge is what I tried to think of. The consistency of good quality compost. Enough food so that they've been able to consume enough to actually produce a mushroom, and also a drop in temperature. That can be induced by soaking a log in water overnight, or if you're in a more of a lab environment, you can drop the temperature in a lab. But in a home-based environment, you usually see mushrooms popping out in winter or at nighttime. Yeah, you see mushrooms that have formed overnight after the temperature has dropped.
So my other question is, are you making your own spores to put in there?
I'm making my own mycelium. The spores are sent out of each mushroom itself. Sometimes 1 million spores are released on any given day. And the spores that are released can consume different substrates. And as they consume the different substrates, they start to form what's called a hyphal knot. They start running across the material, form a hyphal knot, and that's the beginning of the mycelium that we see when we kick over a log or when we culture IMO. Question back there?
What's the best way to collect the spores that fall out?
Ooh.
You can use them to cultivate new ones.
You put a hat underneath, like I did. You can put a petri dish underneath with agar-agar. Remember that stuff from back in high school lab science? That's a good way. You can also just put material, even coffee grounds, opened up that you've stored in the freezer. You can use that as a simple way to collect them. You can also put them on glass. That's often a way that professional cultivators capture spores. Put it on glass, then sandwich another piece of glass on top of the spores and store them that way. It's more difficult to collect them from the wild. Yeah.
A while back, I was walking out in the field with a couple, and there's big cow patties all over, and I said, hey, look, there's mushrooms growing out there. And the guy was from India, and he reached down and grabbed those mushrooms and started stuffing them in his mouth. And
There's a wide variety of
How do you know
mushrooms.
that's good?
I only teach the edible and medicinal growing types, but the same principles apply for whatever type of mushroom you're growing.
so he said,
Well-
since he was from India, if anything that goes in a cow patty is okay. So I don't
Depending
know.
on the quantity. That's my
I'm running
caveat.
up by it.
Psilocybin mushrooms will also grow on straw.
If he's still living.
Yeah, oh, his wife was there for grabbing them. I'm gonna- no.
Any other questions from this corner? Here's one.
Will medicinal mushrooms grow in manure, like cow manure?
Usually
Not
with
like edibles, like oysters,
most of the manure-based mushrooms are what we think of as,
not
well,
edible.
well, we cultivate portobellos in
Okay.
manure, white button mushrooms, cremini mushrooms also grow out of manure. So those are what type? Saprophytes. Lignin and cellulose that's in the manure. And other nutrients. Here's a fun factoid. The first organism to come to land was a fungus. What could they digest if there wasn't any soil on the land? They could digest rocks. It makes me think back to a quote that you told me, Drake. The agricultural land that is South Kohala, all that lava field. Any other questions?
When you hang that up, you hang the bags up,
You can either hang it or open up the top and have a mushroom bouquet put out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, kind of impressive.
and like, you can continue to harvest as soon as you cut one year off.
Yep, you just harvest it as close to the bag as you can and continue watering it. There's a certain lifespan to these kits, which is about 5 or 6 fruitings over a 2-month period. It gets to be a bit of a loose science outside of a lab environment when there's other variables like water and light and air and nutrients that come into play. But usually about 2 months, 5 fruitings for oyster.
And which one is the one that's out in the forest that's usually on rotted wood? It's orange.
Oh, that's a type of jelly mushroom. That one's edible. It's hard to collect a bunch of them, but need it, you need it.
It kind of looks like the shape of the ear.
Oh,
so I was
that-
kind of contemplating as to whether it was
Is
pipi
it,
owl.
is it brownish yellow?
It's kind of like the cord, kind of like that orange right there.
Uh-huh, yep, pepeao sometimes is that bright of a color.
Yeah, it's quite a bit of.
Especially they typically grow on how and kukui. Have you seen them grow on legs?
I've had a lot of like, not albizia. I never see nothing come out of albizia, but mostly the other ones that the sheep and the goats like to eat the leaves a lot. Full nitrogen stuff. It breaks down real fast. Yeah.
One thing with that made me, your comment made me think about the different antifungal agents in wood. Usually you have to, after you chop a piece of wood down and you're ready to inoculate it with your chosen mushroom, it's best to wait a good 2 weeks for the antifungal agents in wood to dissipate. It takes about 2 weeks for those to go away. And then we can inoculate it with our chosen mushroom. Other logs that I've grown mushrooms on include gunpowder, ohia, koa, faya, and those are the main ones that I've grown in a lot of.
Strawberry guava?
Strawberry guava will work on both, yeah. Or regular guava.
Thing is, why would it take a year to form the mushroom? I mean, does the wood have to break down first?
Exactly. It has to break down by the mycelium in the wood consuming it. Each of these spots where you see wax is an inoculation point. I plugged it with sawdust spun of shiitake, and it just takes a while for the mycelium to colonize all this hard lignin and cellulose.
It doesn't wash off in time, or, I mean, it's something that you would also, like water every day?
This can be watered once every 3 or 4 days. Usually I stick the logs in sand about a third of the way in, and that gives the log a constant stream of moisture. You're saying that the wax won't wash off?
Yeah, well, anything, the fungus itself.
The fungus, it's like us. We're more closely related to fungi than we are to plants. We're in the same larger kingdom. You guys have probably talked about this, right?
Sure.
We're more closely related to fungi than we are to plants. We exhale carbon dioxide and inhale oxygen, just like fungi do. They have externalized stomachs, we have internalized stomachs. So the externalized stomach of the mycelium is what consumes logs and straw and hats and paper bags.
Well, the fungi just essentially colonize all that wood.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they won't wash away.
No, can't
They,
really.
they inhabit the entire
Right.
log.
So could-
Another, I would just
I
want to
think,
say,
I think she had a question.
Why won't it grow on the albizia?
I think the albizia has a longer period that it keeps those antifungal agents. And it's just a softer wood in general. It decomposes more readily. I think in part, I haven't studied why that is too much, but I've tried different mushrooms on albizia. None of them rooted out.
Lately, I've seen a powdery yellow substance or powdery orange things that are on the ground. Are they fungus?
If I'm thinking of the type of, if we're thinking of the same thing, those are different types of fungi. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they sometimes are raised off the ground, maybe a ½ an inch or an inch.
Right.
Yeah, that's the type of fungus. And
Is it
sometimes
edible?
they're growing in piles of leaves.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are they edible?
Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge.
Do you think it would be possible to accelerate and or extend your fruiting if you were to mix in natural farming inputs? Or, for instance, something you may be familiar with, like humic or fulvic acids when you're watering your...
Yeah, you can add other things to extend the life of your oyster mushroom or mushroom bag. You can even pour old motor oil onto the bag, which renders the oyster mushrooms inedible, but it gives them a bolst of carbon and hydrogen, which they'll consume. And it works. It works. But we're talking about edible things. It's neat to see though. It just start popping out of the bag. I think you have another question.
yeah, I just wanted to point out, there's a lot of research on turkey tail as well, and very strong cancer benefits. And
Right.
that's a ubiquitous mushroom that would have some benefit here as well.
Right.
In terms of medicinal.
Mm-hmm. Another good way to grow mushrooms, other than straw and bags and on logs is to inoculate actual stumps. By inoculating stumps, you're creating a long-term environment for the mushrooms to grow on, sometimes for decades. Think about all the woody debris, woody organic matter that's underneath that stump. And I think this is also another way to kill trees too. There's fungal sprays that you can spray onto to logs, but we can also wrap rope that's been colonized with mushrooms onto cuts in the log. And also we can inoculate our chainsaw oil with mushrooms, with spores, and inoculate as we cut. We can also take wedges out of a piece of log, put sawdust in that same wedge, and then wrap it with tape, or I've mainly used other rope to wrap it around it. So that's a triple inoculation that you can do. You can chop the log with a chainsaw, do the wedge technique, and also wrap it with a colonized piece of rope. That will almost guarantee that you have mushrooms fruiting out of that stump.
And the stumps, fresh cut stumps, or how long do you have to sit?
It's best to cut within, again, 2 weeks.
Within 2 weeks?
Yeah, so that the antifungal agents in that stump will.
And older ones than that are not useful?
It'll still work on older ones, because most stumps are still living even after you chop them down. You guys know about coppicing? Trees that will coppice, that'll send out suckers, grow mushrooms really well. Yeah.
Can you grow more than one kind of mushroom on the same stump?
Yes, you can. I've seen the armillaria mushroom, which is the honey mushroom on the mainland, growing right next to turkey tail. And yeah, I've seen at least 2 mushrooms growing out of the same stump. But at a certain point, they're going to have a battle of the lignin, over the lignin. Dave, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you've seen or positively identified the turkey tail. Because I see a similar species. It doesn't have the real vivid colors. It's on melasnoma, but I haven't found the turkey tail yet.
The turkey tail doesn't usually have a full ring. It's usually a partial cap. And the colors are somewhat muted here. There's one that looks very similar to turkey tail. Yes, I have found it. It's here.
Zach.
Is a Stropharia grown here?
The king Stropharia will grow here. I have yet to bring it in. We can import it though. And that's a great one to grow in the garden. It grows on wood chips. It's from the eastern part of North America. And it would grow preferably at higher elevations in Hawaii. Places like Volcano and Mountain View, Kolokomauka.
How about eating one?
Right now? Oh, it's always best to cook mushrooms. Why is that? The enzymes that are in mushrooms are only digestible by our body if they're cooked, if they're heated. So even the garden buffet mushrooms that we see in places, we should really be cooking those. It makes it more assimilable to our bodies.
I've seen a mushroom here that looks just like the puffballs we used to see in Idaho. Are they here too?
Most puffballs are edible, not all of them, but the vast majority of them are.
Okay.
The biggest mushroom I've ever seen, I showed this in a couple of my mushroom cultivation classes, was twice as big as this bag. And it popped out of the ground after Hurricane Irene rolled through on the East Coast. And I think the storm somehow induced the mushroom to fruit. That's my hypothesis. It's not a theory, I haven't proven that. Yeah.
So it's good to cook your mushroom. What about dried mushrooms?
Dried mushrooms in terms of rehydrating them to consume?
Just like how it's better to cook them, or like dried mushrooms, the same thing?
It's always best to cook not quite sure of your question. How do you consume dried mushrooms?
Well, like, you still have to cook it, I guess, right?
Yeah.
The whole benefit from it.
Yep. Or you can powder it up and you take it in pill form that way. You can rehydrate dried mushrooms by pouring hydrogen peroxide on them. Let's think about what hydrogen peroxide is, right? It's water and another oxygen. H2O2. Pretty benign. And that will oxygenate and rehydrate mushrooms.
Cooking methods.
Cooking methods. Low heat. It's best not to burn mushrooms because they then become carcinogenic, like most foods that are burned. I mainly put them in stir fries, for me. Yeah. I think that'd be a great addition to those Mongolian barbecues we sometimes have here in Hawaii. Having this mushroom option. What other mushrooms have you guys consumed in the past here? Other than the ones we've talked about. Morels.
Here in Hawaii.
Not morels. Someone's growing morels on Maui, from what I understand. Morels are very difficult to cultivate, but somehow she's doing it. Also, chanterelles are very difficult to cultivate. If you can find those mushrooms that are very lucrative, that's also another farming product.
And these are grown in a controlled environment, or would
Not-
you like to go out like into a forest area where there's water, fern shoots all over the place, and a lot of shade, and then hang those things up? Don't you think it would cultivate a lot better?
These are growing on my back porch, and I'm watering them once a day.
Regular water or rainwater?
This is county water that I let off gas, I let the chlorine off gas overnight. So it's essentially non-fluorinated water at that point. And then the logs you could put in spots in a similar place to your compost pile. There's some shade, but you can certainly grow it in a forest environment.
I was, this past week, I was at the Permaculture Voices 2 conference in San Diego, and Paul Stamets was there. And he said something I'd never heard before, and I keep meaning to check it out. But he said that shiitakes are the best source of vitamin D on the planet,
Right.
especially if you expose them to sunlight
Mhm.
for too long.
Turn them upside down.
Yeah, before you cook them. That they have the highest concentration of vitamin D on the planet.
Right. It's a great source of vitamin D for folks who live in cloudy areas like Seattle, who suffer from seasonal affective disorder. Here in Hawaii, we probably have arguably more vitamin D than we need. At least I do, as someone who spends a lot of time outside.
You say you inoculate. Can you go like say for instance when that matures or gets ready to eat? I'm not sure what the seeding process is. Spores. Can you just go like this and then like go throw them on an old log and it'll come up like shiitake or
How to move relatively spent material onto fresh material? That is something I go into detail on my mushrooms in the landscape workshop. But to give you a brief sense, you can move sawdust spawn onto sawdust spawn being the mycelium that's colonized sawdust. You can move that onto straw fairly easily. But from straw to straw, the strand becomes slightly less vigorous. It's not guaranteed to work. That's just the nature of how fungi consume this type of material. Some people put their spent straw around fruit trees and in their yard, and they do have mushrooms pop up. The King Stropharia is a great one for that. I'm definitely going to import that one.
Are truffles similar to mushrooms?
Truffles are a type of mushroom.
And do you grow those here?
I have seen them here. I've yet to delve into cultivating truffles. They take a while. They're a mycorrhizal fungus group, which means that the fungus pairs with the plant and then roots out the mushroom. In Italy, there's a long tradition of truffle cultivation, and they hire purebred pigs to sniff out those high-quality truffles. That could be something that emerges here as a lucrative side. Maybe we need to start breeding truffle pigs.
Eat a lot of truffles.
Other things we can grow mushrooms on that we have lots of here is coffee based. Last year, let's see, in 2012, on this island, there was, according to the Department of Agriculture in Hawaii, there was 22 million pounds of spent coffee, the coffee fruit that was discarded. A lot of that was sent or put around fruit trees, but to act as a slow release compost. But we could also run them through oyster mushrooms first, have them fruit out, and then compost them underneath our fruit trees. 22 million pounds.
You mean the grounds, coffee grounds?
The spent pulp, after you take off the coffee and the bean itself, that fruit. That's often a money maker in third world countries, but we have yet to really tap that on this side. And coffee is moving more and more into East Hawaii, as we see. There's Hilo Coffee Mill up in, not Hilo, but Mountain View, and Ka'u Coffee Mill. Waipio coffee is really good. So someone could create a micro business just around harvesting the spent material. Also, you can grow mushrooms on spent brewery grain from places like Kona Brewery. No one's harvesting that right now. I don't think either. So a lot of the waste materials, people are recognizing things like wood chips are harder and harder to come by now because people are bringing them into their landscape. There's still harvestable, quote unquote, waste resources that we can turn into edible and medicinal food. I see a couple people reaching for their stomachs. No, I don't see that.
I have one question. You mentioned that the oyster grows on the coffee blades as a substrate. Is that the best variety, or will shiitake or any of the others grow on there?
Shiitake does not. Reishi would. For some reason, shiitake is more particular.
What about the King Strafari?
King Strafari likes woody material, not so much coffee grounds. Cool. Any last minute questions before?
In Michigan, we harvested maitake or hen of the woods under the oak.
Yes.
Can you
I've seen maitake growing underneath koa trees in Kitukapua'ulu up in Bird Park, in the national park. So it does grow here. There's a lot of room for experimenting there, as you can see. More discoveries are being made by amateur mycologists right now than professional mycologists. And what Hawaii doesn't have right now is a mycological society. Pretty much every other state has a mycological society. I guess this is a version. This is a version of a mycological society. Yeah, we'll put that loosely in that category. But I think that would be great to start figuring out how to utilize fungi. I really even talked about all their applications outside of the landscape. Thanks for your attention, and I have my business cards up here if you want to get in touch by a kid.